The rain had been falling for hours, soft at first, then harder, until it became a steady rhythm against the window pane. Claire sat by the window, her fingers tracing the outline of the droplets as if following invisible paths to somewhere far away. The small house in the countryside was quiet now, too quiet. It used to hum with life, laughter, and the occasional outburst of music when Adam played his old guitar in the living room. Now, all that was left were the echoes of moments that once felt endless. It had been 3 months since the accident. 3 months since she'd stood by the roadside, unable to comprehend that the twisted metal in front of her used to be the car he drove every day. The world didn't stop for her grief. People kept moving, seasons kept changing, and life, cruelly, stubbornly, went on. But she couldn't. Every morning she woke to silence. Every night, she lay awake, wondering if there was something she could have done differently. Maybe if she hadn't called him that night. Maybe if she hadn't asked him to come home early. Maybe he'd still be alive. The guilt was like a ghost, invisible, but always there. She reached for the old leather journal on the table. It was his. Adam used to write in it every night, random thoughts, song lyrics, sketches of ideas he never finished. She hadn't opened it since the funeral. But that night, something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the storm, or the unbearable silence, or the weight of everything she hadn't said. She flipped it open carefully, as if it might fall apart in her hands. The handwriting was messy, his usual scrawl, impossible for anyone but her to read. She smiled faintly, tracing the ink with her thumb. The first page she opened said, "If anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll keep living. Really living. Don't turn into a ghost of who you were." Her chest tightened. She closed her eyes and felt the tears coming before she could stop them. Outside, the thunder rolled, distant but heavy. The power flickered. For a moment, the house dimmed into near darkness. Claire sighed, half expecting the lights to go out completely, but they held steady. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the air, a tension, a presence she couldn't name. Then she heard it, faintly, almost like an echo. A soft strum of guitar strings. Her heart skipped a beat that it couldn't be. The guitar was in the living room, untouched since he died. She froze, straining to listen. Another note, clearer this time, drifting down the hallway. She stood, her hands trembling. "Adam," she whispered, instantly feeling foolish, but she walked toward the sound anyway. The living room was dim, lit only by the flickering light from outside. The guitar sat exactly where she'd left it, leaning against the couch. But one of the strings was still vibrating, gently, as if it had just been plucked. That Claire's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't the kind of person who believed in signs or ghosts. But at that moment, logic didn't matter. The air around her felt charged, familiar, comforting even. She sat on the couch, staring at the guitar, waiting for something else to happen. But there was only silence now, the kind that presses against your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. Eventually, she picked up the guitar herself. Her fingers felt clumsy. She hadn't played since the day he died. But muscle memory guided her through the chords he used to play. The sound was shaky, uneven, but real, and for a brief moment, she didn't feel alone. The next morning, she woke up to sunlight breaking through the storm clouds. The journal was still on the table beside her. She picked it up again. This time, she noticed a folded piece of paper tucked between the pages. It wasn't there before. She was sure of it. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. It was another note, written in his handwriting, but different. The ink looked fresh, the paper crisp. The things we leave behind aren't always gone. Sometimes they're waiting for us to find the courage to look. Claire's heart pounded. She stared at the note for what felt like an eternity, trying to convince herself it was some forgotten letter, something she'd missed before. But deep down, something told her otherwise. That was the day everything changed. She started noticing little things. A door she was sure she'd closed standing open. The faint scent of his cologne lingering in the hallway. The radio turning on by itself to the same song he used to sing to her. At first, she thought she was losing her mind. But as days passed, the fear slowly turned into something else. Curiosity. Hope. Maybe. She began to write in the journal herself, replying to the notes she found inside. She didn't expect answers. It was more like talking to him in her own way. But then, one evening, after she wrote, "I miss you so much," She closed the book and left it on the table. When she opened it the next morning, there was a single line written beneath her words, "I never left." Her hands went cold. She dropped the journal as if it burned her. It didn't make sense. None of it did. But the part of her that still hurt, still reached for him in the dark. Didn't care. For the first time since he died, Claire felt something she hadn't in months. Connection. That day, she drove into town for the first time in weeks. The rain had washed everything clean. The air smelled of wet earth and blooming flowers. She stopped by the small cafe where they used to spend Sunday mornings. 2 cups of coffee, one for her, one for him. She ordered both, sat by the window, and stared at the empty seat across from her. An older woman sat a few tables away, watching her quietly. When Claire looked up, the woman smiled, soft, knowing. "Still saving him a seat?" She asked gently. Claire blinked. "Do I know you?" The woman shook her head. "No, but I know that look. I used to sit just like you, waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. Until I realized. Sometimes they never really leave." Claire froze. The words felt eerily familiar, like the ones in the journal. She wanted to ask more. But when she looked again, the woman was gone. Her coffee sat untouched. When she got back home, she found the journal open on the table, the same line written again, only this time in bolder strokes. "I never left." The next few weeks felt like walking through a dream, one where the line between the living and the dead had quietly faded away. Claire stopped questioning what was real. She just accepted it. Every morning, she'd wake up to something new. A page turned in the journal. The faint sound of humming in the kitchen. Once, she even found a cup of coffee on the counter, black, just the way Adam drank it. It was warm when she touched it first. She thought she was losing her mind. Maybe this was her brain's way of coping with grief. But the more she felt his presence, the less she cared about explanations. Logic couldn't fill the empty space he left behind. One night, she wrote in the journal again, "If you're really here, tell me why. Why now?" The next morning, she opened it to find new words in his unmistakable handwriting. "Because you're ready to listen." She read the words over and over again, her chest tightening. Ready to listen? To what? Later that day, she found herself drawn to the old attic she hadn't entered since they moved in. Dust coated everything. Sunlight sliced through cracks in the wooden beams. Their old belongings sat untouched. Boxes labeled wedding, music stuff, college. But one box sat apart from the rest. It wasn't labeled. Claire knelt down and opened it. Inside was an old camera, Adam's favorite. He'd taken it everywhere. Road trips, concerts, lazy Sundays in bed. She turned it on. Somehow, the battery still worked. There were only a few photos left on the memory card. She clicked through them slowly. Her and Adam laughing at the lake, their dog sleeping by the fire. A blurry shot of her dancing in the kitchen. Then she reached the last picture. Her stomach dropped. It was their house. Same living room, same couch, but taken recently. The photo showed her sitting on the couch, asleep, with the journal beside her. And behind her, in the faint reflection of the window, stood Adam. Her hands shook. She stared at the image until tears blurred her vision. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." But somewhere deep down, she already knew. That night, she dreamed of him for the first time since the funeral. They were standing in the meadow behind their old house, the sky painted in soft gold and violet. He looked exactly the same. Brown hair tousled, eyes bright, that half smile that always melted her anger. "Adam," she whispered, reaching for him. Her hand passed through his like mist. "You found the photo," he said. His voice sounded both near and distant, as if coming through static. "What's happening to me?" she asked. "Am I going crazy?" He smiled sadly. "No, you're remembering." "Remembering what?" He looked away, toward the horizon. "That love doesn't stop where life ends. It just changes form." Before she could speak again, the dream began to fade, colors draining away, the sound of his voice dissolving into wind. When she woke, the journal was open beside her. One new line was written inside. "The bridge between us isn't built by grief, but by love." Over the next days, she began noticing the world differently. Small, delicate signs, whispers of something bigger than herself. A song she hadn't heard in years playing randomly on the radio. The scent of rain just before she thought of him. The way the light fell through the window exactly as it had the day they met. It wasn't haunting. It was guidance. She began to write every day, not just to him, but to herself. Each entry felt like unraveling a knot inside her chest. Then one evening, while flipping through the journal, she noticed a page she hadn't seen before. It was folded tightly, pressed deep into the back. She opened it carefully. It wasn't a message. It was a map, a simple hand-drawn map of the countryside surrounding their home, with a red X marked near the edge of the forest. Next to it were 4 words written in bold letters: where it all began. Claire's pulse quickened. That place, the clearing, it was where Adam had proposed to her. Without thinking, she grabbed her jacket, the journal, and a flashlight, and drove toward the forest road. The wind had picked up. The sky was fading into twilight. By the time she reached the clearing, the world felt suspended in silence. The grass was overgrown, the wildflowers taller than her knees. In the center of the field stood a single wooden box, small, weathered, and covered in moss. Her heart pounded as she knelt beside it. Inside was a stack of letters, each addressed to her in Adam's handwriting. The top one was dated a week before the accident. She hesitated before unfolding it. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. I don't know how, but I need you to understand. I wasn't afraid. Not of dying. The only thing that scared me was leaving you alone. So I started writing these letters, hoping that one day they'd find you when you were ready to let me go. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. The next lines blurred as tears fell across the page. If you feel me near, it's not your imagination. I'm not trapped. I'm trying to guide you. There's something I never told you, something I need you to see. At the bottom of the letter was a set of GPS coordinates. The next morning, she followed them. The coordinates led her miles away, down a dirt path that eventually ended at a secluded cabin. It was small, half-collapsed, but she recognized it instantly. Adam's father's old place. They'd visited it only once before. Inside, everything was covered in dust. But in the corner of the room sat an old tape recorder. Next to it, a note. Press play. Her hands shook as she hit the button. At first, there was only static. Then his voice. Claire, he said softly. If you're hearing this, then I guess you found what I left behind. There's so much I wish I'd told you. But if I'd said it then, maybe it wouldn't have meant as much. You were always the brave one, you know? The one who saw beauty where I saw chaos. The one who stayed when everything else fell apart. Her knees weakened. She sank to the floor as the tape continued. I don't know what happens after we die, but I do know this: love doesn't end. It echoes. It leaves marks in time, in places, in people. So if you ever feel lost, if you ever forget who you are, come back here. To us. Because you're the reason I found peace. The tape clicked off. Claire sat there for a long time, the silence around her heavy and holy. Then, softly, she whispered, I still love you. And for the briefest moment, she swore she heard his voice reply, faint, like wind through leaves. I know. That night, she dreamed again. This time, the meadow was brighter, the air warmer. Adam stood waiting for her. You found it, he said, smiling. I did, she said. But I don't understand. Why now? Why come back at all? He looked at her with eyes full of sorrow and peace. Because you couldn't move forward until you stopped looking backward. I needed you to remember that you're still alive. She stepped closer. Will I see you again? He hesitated. Not like this. But I'll be there, in every sunrise, in every song you hum without realizing it. I'll be in the quiet moments, the ones that used to scare you. That's where love lives now. Her tears fell freely. I don't want to say goodbye. He smiled softly. Then don't. Just keep going. The wind carried his voice away. The meadow faded into light. When Claire opened her eyes, the sun was streaming through her window. For the first time, it didn't hurt. On the table beside her, the journal lay open to a final message. You've crossed the bridge. The rain had stopped by the time dawn crept over the horizon. A faint, silver light spread through the mist that hung low over the quiet hills. Emily stood at the window, a cup of cold coffee in her hands, her reflection faintly visible against the glass. Her eyes were tired, but behind them was something new. Not despair, not fear, but a quiet determination. She hadn't slept. Neither had Daniel. They'd spent the entire night sitting across from each other at the small wooden table, talking, arguing, sometimes in silence. The words had spilled out, the hurt, the guilt, the longing for something real again. For the first time in years, there was no anger between them. Just truth. When she turned from the window, Daniel was sitting on the couch, his head bowed, his hands clasped together. He looked older somehow, not in his face, but in the way he carried the weight of everything that had happened. "I'm leaving today," she said softly. He lifted his head. "I know. I don't know where yet. Maybe the city. Maybe somewhere quiet. But I can't keep pretending that staying here will fix anything." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "I never asked you to stay," he whispered. "I just hoped you'd want to." Emily set her mug down and crossed the room, sitting beside him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. "I'll come back," she said, "when I've figured out who I am again. When I'm not afraid to feel something real." He looked at her, his lips trembling into a faint smile. "Then I'll be here," he said, "no matter how long it takes." That morning, Emily packed lightly, a suitcase, a few clothes, her journal, and the small photograph of her and Daniel from years ago, before everything fell apart. As she zipped it shut, she noticed the dried lavender he had placed on top, the same kind they once hung in the kitchen when they first moved in together. Outside, the air was cool and damp. The ground shimmered with dew, and the distant road stretched endlessly into the mist. Daniel stood by the gate, his jacket thrown over his shoulders. He didn't try to stop her. He just watched as she walked down the path, her boots pressing softly into the wet earth. When she turned to look back, he was still there, standing silently. Like a promise she might one day keep, the city was louder than she remembered. Horns, voices, footsteps, a constant rhythm of motion that made her feel both alive and lost. Emily rented a small apartment near the river. The place was old, the walls cracked and pale, but it was hers at first. She didn't know what to do with herself. She wandered aimlessly through bookstores, art galleries, parks. She watched strangers and wondered who they were, what lives they were running from or toward. Then, one evening, she found a small cafe tucked between two brick buildings. It smelled of cinnamon and roasted coffee beans. The walls were lined with photographs of faces, strangers captured in moments of laughter, sadness. Loved out a man behind the counter smiled. "You new around here?" "Yeah," she said, smiling faintly. "Just trying to start over." He nodded. "Then welcome. Everyone here's starting over in some way." There was something comforting in that, in knowing she wasn't the only one rebuilding from pieces. Days turned into weeks. Emily began sketching again. She filled her notebook with drawings of people she saw. The woman reading by the river, the old man feeding pigeons, the boy selling flowers at the corner. Each line felt like a heartbeat returning. One afternoon, she sat by the cafe window, sketching the skyline, when a shadow fell across the page. "That's beautiful," said a voice. She looked up. A young man stood there, tall, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He introduced himself as Adam, a photographer who'd recently moved to the city. They started talking about art, about loss, about the way people sometimes have to break before they can begin again. It wasn't love, not yet. It was something simpler. A quiet understanding between two people who had both known silence and wanted to hear laughter again. Months passed. The city no longer felt like a stranger. Emily's sketches began to appear on the cafe walls. People noticed. A gallery owner offered her a small exhibition. For the first time in years, she felt proud, not for what she had escaped, but for what she had built from the ruins. Yet, sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, she thought of Daniel, of the way he looked at her that morning, of the lavender on her suitcase, of the promise she had made. One rainy evening, as she closed her sketchbook, she found herself dialing his number almost without thinking. Her heart raced as it rang. He answered on the second ring. "Emily?" She froze, her breath catching. "Hey, it's me." For a moment, there was only silence. Then his soft laugh came through the line. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten me." "I tried," she whispered. "But I couldn't." They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. About how he'd fixed up the old house, how the lavender had grown wild in the garden, how he still kept her favorite mug on the shelf. When she finally hung up, she felt lighter. Not because she was ready to go back, but because she finally believed she could. A year later, Emily returned. The hills looked smaller now, the town quieter, but familiar in a way that felt like a heartbeat she had once lost. She walked up the dirt path to the house, the paint chipped, the porch light flickering. And there he was. Daniel stood by the door, a little older, a little grayer. But still him. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then he smiled, the same tired, gentle smile that once made her fall in love. "Welcome home," he said. She dropped her bag, walked up the steps, and wrapped her arms around him. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of everything they had been too afraid to say. Inside, the house smelled of lavender and rain. On the table lay 2 cups of coffee, one warm, one waiting. Emily sat down, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. "You remembered," she said softly. "I always did." Outside, the rain began to fall again, gentle, steady, cleansing. And for the first time in years, Emily didn't feel lost. She felt found. Weeks later, as the sun rose over the hills, Emily stood in the garden, sketchbook in hand. Daniel came out, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She smiled. "A beginning." He kissed the top of her head. "It's beautiful already." And maybe it was. Not perfect, not complete, but real. And that was enough. Because sometimes, the most beautiful stories aren't the ones that end happily, but the ones that find peace in the middle of the storm.